Okay, tonight we have with us Dr. Lawton Stewart from University of Georgia, who's going to talk to us about nutrition in heifer development.
All right. Well, as Nikki said, my name's Lawton Stewart, and for simplicity, y'all just call me Lawton. I'm glad I was able to join y'all tonight. Just a little bit about myself. I work at the University of Georgia. I'm one of our extension beef specialists. So I work with the county agents, both UGA and FPSU throughout the state. My background is nutrition, forage management. I mean, I've been here about 14 years, and one of the areas I've really just thoroughly enjoyed, one of my passions, is this heifer development, because I think it's just this great way of you take these females and you start with a calf, and then you're developing a female that hopefully is going to be in your herd for a long time. I always start off one of these as, this is what we want: heifers and good flesh. We got green grass. Things are going great. But I tell you, I rarely get the call that says, "Lawton, come look at my cows, my heifers. Everything's great." This is the call I get a lot of times. And this is a first calf heifer. We can tell she's got a calf on her side, because if you look closely at that picture, she's got that udder. She's got a developed bag, so she's trying to produce some milk. But she will not rebreed. And that's one of the biggest problems we see is first calf heifers not rebreeding. And it's pictures worth 1,000 words. We can see here, ultimately, this comes down to a nutritional issue. Her body condition is really low. If we look at the pasture around her, I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but if your manure is stacked up higher than your grass, you have a quantity and a quality problem. And you can see here, it's stacked up higher than the grass, so we have a quality and a quantity problem. So when we think about it, too, this is a large animal, so it takes a while. You know, if we get into a bad situation, it's hard to dig out. We're talking about something that's got a gestation length of 285 days. So it's something that we really have to focus on. And I jokingly say this is a picture my dad took of me when I was little, but we can learn a lot from our mistakes, either ours or other people's, of what went wrong, and hopefully we don't make those decisions or those mistakes again. So, you know, we think about some of this, especially when we're with cow, there's going to be some intimidating things. But I've always tried to stress is if we think about and make a plan on the front end going into it, then we definitely can avoid as many of these situations as possible. So for today, the 4 areas I want to talk about, we don't have an economist talking, but I'm going to give you some what I call cowboy math. This is a guy that's not an economist, but looking at some of the basic economics to kind of help, in my mind, when I start talking about dollars, I understand things a lot better. So we're going to talk about some of the basic economics of heifer development, and then the importance of nutrition. Obviously, that's why Nikki and everybody asked me to be here. So we're going to talk a little about nutrition, body condition scoring. You're looking at body condition of these females and how that can be a tremendous tool, and then developing a plan. And today I'm going to talk more about concepts and try to use some real world examples. Not so much to sit here and tell you use this ration, this ration, this ration, but hopefully if we can learn the overall concepts, then that will help you as you move forward, make a plan. When something that doesn't make sense, you get a hold of one of us, your county agents. I always put a plug in for county agents because they're such a great resource. Whatever county you're in, they're really good resources. So if we talk about just the basics of what we're trying to do, if we are a cow-calf producer, which I'm assuming most of you are, and that's most of what we have in the state of Georgia and the Southeast, are cow-calf producers. And I usually, if I got a crowd, I say, what is our number one goal? And we can say some things about quality of life, but at the end of the day, we got to make some money, or at least break even, or else things are gonna work very well. And so how do we do this? And how do you calculate that? So if we have a cow-calf operation, a very simplistic way to look at it is that price we sell that calf for, and I heard earlier we were talking about some prices, minus what it costs to carry that cow throughout the year, essentially is a very crude estimation of what our profit will be, right? Because everything, when we talk about annual carrying costs, some people say, what does that mean? That is everything from feed cost to medical cost, sire costs. Even if we're really looking at it in depth, we look at fixed and variable costs so that we come up exactly, if we take everything on our operation, what it costs to have that cow there on a yearly basis. That's what she's got to make us in order to essentially earn her keep. So let's do this. I looked on just the main board, the CME board, and a 600-pound calf, a little bit conservative, but $1.60 a pound. which is pretty decent. As we get bigger, those calves are going to be less per pound. But we're just, for this example, we're going to say at $1.60, that 600-pound calf, which is a little bit bigger calf. But typically, when I'm using that price, that's about the size a heifer will be when we decide, are we going to develop her as a female, say, in a herd, or possibly we're going to market her as a feeder heifer, send her to the sale barn. And then let's say that annual carrying cost, this is one of the biggest questions I get. What is the annual carrying cost of a cow? And I tell them it's anywhere between $400 and $2,000. And again, I do some things, try to be a little bit of a smart aleck to get people thinking, but there's so many things. What my carrying cost may be if I have cows is going to be completely different than yours. So I do that hopefully that people will really sit down and determine, do a little bit of math to know exactly what it costs to keep a cow in your place for a full year. So then from that, we're saying, okay, $960 minus the $700 equals a $260. If we're profiting that, then life is good. But are we forgetting anything? And absolutely, it's the heifer development cost. Because if you look at it, a heifer is going to be 2 years old before she ever has her first calf. And then if we look at when she markets her first calf, she's going to be 2 years and anywhere from 6 to 9 months. So essentially, we're having to account for all that time it takes her to get to that point, and we have to depreciate that across her lifetime. And all these kids that say, especially I got 4 in the home that say, Daddy, I'm never going to have to use math again. Yeah, you will, even if you got cows. Because if we think about it, we talk about we want to have that first calf. Well, then what else? We want her at 2 years of age. They want to have a second calf at 3 years of age, third calf. See where I'm going? We want to keep her in our herd as long as possible. So now if we think about it, profitability over the lifetime, 2 more things we have to include is what it costs to develop that heifer. So if we have a homegrown heifer, what it takes to get her essentially to the point of having a calf. So we either look at that as what that value of that calf is it's selling. So let's say it's that $600 plus everything from a nutritional standpoint, from a breeding standpoint that takes her to get to that first calf. But then also we have to consider the salvage value of that heifer. And what I mean there is when she exits the herd, there's usually 2 ways they exit the herd. One is in a trailer to the sale barn as an open cow or something along that lines, or we hope that it's not by digging a hole and disposing of her because she's died. So then we look at it, and I apologize for getting the algebra, but essentially we just took what we did, that calf price minus the carrying cost, times so many years she's going to be on our herd. Then we have to subtract what we invested in her from a development cost, but also we can add back some salvage value if we're able to sell her to exit the herd. So if we bring back those other numbers, we're going to say heifer development cost is $1,750. Again, that's another number that can go way up or way down, but that was the average price of some of the bred heifer sales over the past spring. So I just grabbed that value. And then we're going to say a salvage value of $700. So that's selling a cull cow at the sale barn. And we're hoping that we get some money out of her. So if we do that, and good old school algebra, we solve for X, and that's our break even, we find out it can take as long as 4 years just before she pays herself off, and then she truly starts becoming profitable in the herd. Little bit of an anxious point there, but that's some real world thoughts to have. So what can we do? There's several strategies. We can, one, change the price so we can add value to our calves, decrease our carrying costs, decrease our heifer costs, be more efficient. But we wrote an article one time, it's called Cutting Costs, Not Corners, how to be efficient in the cattle industry. So thinking about how do we do it right and do it more efficiently, not necessarily cutting corners in certain places. But on our heifers, we want to select heifers that are going to stay in our herd a long time, because if we're going to invest in them, we want to make sure they're going to be there for the long haul. And also identify and cull heifers early. And that's when we talk about this heifer development, especially when it coincides with nutrition. We don't want a heifer that's going to be that's going to be in our herd that's going to be what we call a hard keeper. Just hard to keep weight on, hard to keep her going. And that's what we talk about using development programs, whether it's just a simple development program on your farm, or we have the herd program, the University of Georgia, where consigners actually consign their heifers, and we go through the entire development period, and then we either have a sale available so they can sell them as bred heifers, or they can take them home. through that. And it's essentially, there's a fee involved with that that covers the cost. They pay that up front, and that covers the cost of that. But whether it's at home or through a program, these development programs are geared to help you select those females that are going to stay in your herd and be productive for a long time. So let's talk a little bit about the nutrition side of things. And I talked about nutrition, but ultimately the number one factor driving profitability in the cow-calf operation is reproductive efficiency. And what I mean is, the most important thing is that ability for that cow to have a calf on the ground every 365 days. And then we go back to the annual carrying costs. That's what we're trying to say is she has to cover her costs on a yearly basis so that we can hopefully break even, but hopefully make some profit. And that is highly dependent on nutrition. So when Dr. Fontes and Dr. Jones come back, you can tell them that they can't breed them unless we can feed them. But to help visualize, there's two slides I always use, pictures and graphs, to help visualize nutrition when it comes to our cow-calf herd. So if we look at a cow and how she prioritizes nutrients, so this is just from a physiological standpoint. The number one thing they got to do is stay alive, so we call that maintenance. Two, if we're heifers, what we're talking about, they're still growing through that first calf, through that first breeding into that first calf. So they're going to grow. Then they're going to lactate, so they're going to give this little guy some groceries. And then when all that's taken care of from a nutritional standpoint, then they're going to reproduce. Which you think about, makes sense. They need to take care of themselves and everything else before they bring another one into the world. But then what we're saying here is we just said our number one priority is reproductive efficiency. But from this physiological standpoint, the nutritional standpoint, it's their last priority. So that's why nutrition becomes so important in keeping these cows or these heifers on the right stage of nutrition. So here's another figure I put together. And the reason I want to do this is if we look at this, if we go from left to right, that's 365 days. So we're talking about one complete calving interval. So from one calf on day 0 to the next calf on day 365. And then on the y-axis, we're looking at the change in protein and energy requirements. And that's typically what we focus on from a nutritional standpoint. We need to worry about minerals and vitamins, but for today, I really want to focus on protein and energy. And so if you look across the bottom, this gray box is maintenance. So for simplicity, we're going to say that stays the same. And let me back up and say this is for the brood cow. I want to start here, then we're going to talk about heifers, because this is where she's got to get to it eventually. But what we see then is after she has that first calf, and I don't have my pointer, so y'all just have to bear with me. On the left, as she has that first calf, those requirements are going up till we hit this point, and I'll draw that line right here, we call peak lactation. So essentially, she's taking care of herself, and she's producing milk for that calf. But then as that calf's rumen starts to develop, starts relying less and less on mama and more on their own ability to graze or maybe as a creep feeder. So that nutrient requirement is going down because she's producing less milk. Then we hit out here to this late lactations. We say the requirement's gone down. So you can see at peak lactation, and these numbers can wiggle a little bit, but for our average cow in Georgia, they need about, right there at the peak, they need about 60% TDN, or total digestible nutrients, or that's the form of which we talk about energy in that way, is TDN, and 12% protein. Then we look out here at this late lactation, it's 9% protein, 55% energy. But then as we wean those calves, and a lot of our spring calving herds are getting close to this, by the end of August, they're going to start weaning calves, and we have dry cows. And it's very easy, I shouldn't say very easy, it's much easier to get a dry cow by on 7% protein and 48% energy to maintain that body condition compared to peak lactation. But if she's done her job, if we've done our job, she's rebred, she's starting to gestate, she's producing that next fetus, and those requirements are going up. And so those are the 3 stages I typically look at, because you can even see late lactation, it's about the same as right there prior to calving. But I also like to point out here is if we come back over here, and you'll see where I have this breeding, right? Because when we think about the gestation length on a cow, it's 200, I say 85 days. I like to work in that multiple of 5. It's usually somewhere between 280, 283. But still, that means if we say 285 days of gestation, if we look at the total year, Subtract that means we only have 80 days from calving to when she needs to rebreed. And if we go up above that arrow and look right up here, we're just past peak lactation. So essentially, we're putting a tremendous amount of nutritional pressure on a cow in order to breed when we want her to. And when I say pressure, it's not that big. If we do the right management, it's completely feasible to do it. But I say pressure in the sense that if we don't hit that point, they're going to slip a cycle. If we don't have the right plain nutrition, they're not going to cycle. So that could be 21 more days before she may come back into heat. So then what happens, we have a calf that's 21 days younger. Then if we look at all across the lifetime for weaning, 21 days, every day accounts for about 2 pounds of growth. So 21 days by missing that breeding season, that breeding date, is going to cost us approximately 40 pounds. And so that's money we're losing. So I like to do, I just keep it in perspective, because then if we think about our heifers, their requirements are going to be even a little higher until we get to this point. So let's talk about body condition. I keep saying body condition, body condition. And what does that mean? Well, the fancy way to say it is that it says the energy reserve status of the cow, more or less how fat are they? What is the body cover there? And so in these two pictures, these are the two extremes. We talk about a 1 to 9 scale where 1 is emaciated. You see that Brahman cow on the left, all the way up to a very obese animal on the right. You can see that there's a tremendous amount of cover on that animal, that horned red cow there on the right. Really, that's kind of the two extremes, but wanted to come to the middle. So 4s and 5s. And this is where we see a lot of cows. These are some pictures from when I was in Virginia. And at first glance, if this was your herd and we rode out, we're looking at cows or heifers, at first glance, you'd say they look pretty similar. But if we look closer to the one on the top, that Charolais, we start looking closer. We look at the places we look for body condition. The first place I look is ribs. How many ribs can I count? If you look closely on this female, I see 1, 2, and part of a 3rd rib. A general rule of thumb, I say, is we can see 1 rib, I'm not worried. When we start seeing more of that 2nd rib is when I start to get concerned. Then we look down the top line of those animals. As you can see, let me back up and do a side note. Don't confuse body fill. If we look back here behind her ribs, you can see she's sunk in behind her ribs. That's just a body fill issue. That has nothing to do with her body condition. But if we look above her, above that, at that top line, we can see part of her spine. Just a little bit, but it's there. So that's another place we look. If we start seeing spine, part of that backbone, then I get a little concerned. Then I come and look around her tail head. Let's see, there's my laser pointer. There we go. We look around that tail head. You can see that indentation right there beside her tail head. She doesn't have any fat there. And then I come up here and look right behind her front leg, that shoulder to rib junction. You can see it's well defined. There's no fat there. So these are the points where a 4 starts concerning me, or a 4 compared to the 5. We look down here. We can see a little bit of a rib. We cannot see her backbone, maybe a little bit up here over her hip. Well, if we look across the top, we'd have to actually put our hands on her. Maybe a little bit of fill here around her tail head, but a much smoother transition from that shoulder to her ribs. And I showed these two because a 5 is where we need to be. 5 is the ideal condition of a cow that we like to keep her in. And the reason is, I'm going to pull up this. This is a study from Dr. Bill Kunkel, who's at University of Florida years ago. And it's really neat. They went and did this survey of these larger herds and ranches across Florida, Texas, and Oklahoma. And they were looking at the pregnancy rate compared to body condition scores. And a lot of times now I'll ask a question, what is our goal pregnancy rate? It's kind of I won't say a trick question. Our goal is 100%, but it's not always realistic to have 100%. 90% is typically kind of that point where we say, okay, we're doing good. So if we look at these, then we have pregnancy rate on the y-axis, and I group these. I have 3s and belows, 4s, 5s, and then 6 and above. And the reason is I want to focus on this 4, 5, but here's what they found. So what we're saying here is on average, these 5s are almost 90% on their conception rate, their pregnancy rate, which is really good. But you see these 4s, we're all the way down here at 60. And the reason I always show this is I say that body condition and body condition scoring is that tool It's that concept that links reproductive efficiency to nutrition. It helps us, it's a tool we can use to help us track how well our nutritional program is going to allow us to maximize our reproductive efficiency. It doesn't take, some people a little intimidated by body condition score, and I tell people just start writing it down. There's publications, you can look at different pictures, but at the end of the day, let's pick 3 times in the year that we typically look at these cows and have them up, which is breeding, weaning, and calving, that we get our eyes on these cows. And those are the times we typically can put body condition, because then we can start relating that body condition score to their performance, maybe where they're breeding, how well their calf is doing. And it helps us make management decisions, mainly from a nutritional standpoint. So when we talk about developing a heifer nutritional plan, how do we do it? So on one hand, we understand our heifer, those nutrient requirements, and there's 3 phases I like to think about. We have that development phase, which is from weaning, maybe after a preconditioning phase. After we get those females weaned, we decide which ones we want to use. So we have that development phase up to when we breed them. And then we have that pregnancy phase, which essentially is the time which they're pregnant. And then we have that first calf heifer. So from parturition to when we wean that next calf, or when we get her bred for that second time. So those are 3 phases. So on one hand, let's understand our heifers. On the other hand, let's understand our forage system, whether we're talking about our pastures or conserved forage. And when 1 and 2 don't come together, let's understand how we can develop an economic supplement. And some of these things I'm going to touch on just enough so y'all invite me back maybe to talk some more, but I also want to put a plug in for Lisa Baxter and Jennifer Tucker. They're my co-workers. They're down in Tifton, but they work a lot as well with forages, and they do some great programs on how to manage your forages, your pastures, to maximize the nutrients you're getting out of them. So if we talk about developing these beef heifers and our nutritional goals, as we've said, I've said it several times, we wanted to calf at 2 years old. And we typically say that that goal is somewhere between 1.5 pounds, maybe 1.75 pounds. As long as they're in the right type of, the right body condition, they're around a 5, a 6 is okay. We want to keep them gaining at that so that they are meeting all those requirements for growth. And the general rule of thumb is we want our heifers to breed at 60 to 65% of their body weight, of their mature body weight. So most of our cows in Georgia, we talk a lot about 1,000-pound cows, but I don't know if they exist anymore. But typically we're looking at 1,200 to 1,300-pound cows. So at breeding, that would be about 780 to 850 pounds that we need them to be at the time of breeding. And typically that's to ensure that they're on the right plan of nutrition that they cycle. And I believe there's some other speakers who will talk more about the reproductive side. And then the goal is to keep them gaining at 85%. At the time that they have that first calf, we want them to gain, be about 85% of that mature body weight. So for a 1,200-pound cow, that's going to be about 1,000, a little over 1,000 pounds. For a 1,300-pound cow, that's going to be right at about 1,100 pounds. And see here, I have the 2 requirements. So when we have that calf growing, the requirements are a little higher, 65% energy, 11% crude protein. Once we get them bred, we can slow down a little bit, 60% energy, 10% protein. But then we want to calve at 3 years of age. So we have that period, remember going back to the figure where we had that peak lactation requirement of 60% energy for our cows. It's actually going to be higher. It's going to be about 63 to 64% for these heifers to maintain their body condition. While they have that calf on their side, we still want them to grow a little bit and then breed when we want them to. So some of the strategies, manage them separately, if at all possible. That way we can economically, or we can be more efficient so we can meet the requirements of those heifers. So we maximize our efficiency there. We feed them exactly what we need. Then we have our cows separately. Some people say they can't do that, which I completely understand. They don't have the room to do it. So that's when we look at possibly using some of the heifer development programs. And there's other ones out there, not just the one that we use with the University of Georgia extension, but there's definitely some others out there. And then develop economical nutritional program. And I always say in this part of the world, our #1 most economical source of nutrients is forages. whether we're grazing them or harvesting them as hay for the wintertime. That is how if we can, I always say that we're not cattle producers, we're really grass producers that are using four-legged harvesters. And if we can do some of those things, that really helps us be more efficient and actually get the most out of the land that we have. And then utilize supplementation when needed, and to recognize, probably one of the bigger things is to recognize if and when we need that supplementation. So target growth, I just showed you that, and I get this question a lot, why don't we just go ahead and push them and get them there? Let's do 3 pounds per head per day, which is pretty fast growth. That's pushing almost like a finishing ration. And the reason is, there's 2 reasons. Is one, there's definitely some research, especially we see it in the dairy cow side, that high weight gains prior to puberty results in fat being deposited in those udders before they go through puberty. So ultimately, then those udders don't fully develop, and that then affects their lifetime productivity, their ability to raise calves. So they may get bred, but they're not going to be able to produce as much milk to produce as good a calf, a heavy calf, as we want them to. And then also, high rates of gain pre-puberty can result in decreased longevity. And I make the comment when we talk a lot about our heifer development program, we talk a lot about, we got to get these heifers bred because we got to sell more. And I say, no, this is not the Ritz-Carlton resort. This is boot camp. We want these heifers to go through an environment and a situation similar to what they're going to be in for the rest of their life, so that then we can select heifers that are going to maintain or going to be in the program for a long time. We don't want to make any excuses during this development phase. So if we throw the kitchen sink at them and feed them all kind of good stuff, and they get fat and they get bred, then they go back home and they may have to survive mostly on Bahia grass, which I'm a big fan of Bahia grass, but they fall apart and then we don't get them rebred. So I'm a firm believer in identifying those efficient animals early, so we know they're going to stay in our herd much longer. Because as we saw earlier, the longer they are, the quicker they're going to pay themselves off, and then they're really going to start earning us some money. So I'm really going to take one quick slide, and the reason is if we look at the majority, I shouldn't say majority, but a lot of our cows calve in the wintertime, January to February. So then they're mostly being weaned. These calves, they're going to be our replacement heifers, are going to be weaned in the fall, and then they're being developed through the winter. So hay tends to be a large resource we rely on for heifer development, which can be a great thing. If we look at hay produced, again, this is more of a plug for another talk, but we talk a lot about storing, testing, and inventory. And those 3 things right there are tremendous when it comes to hay management. If we can store it properly to minimize the weather loss, test it. If you don't hear anything else today, the biggest return on investment you'll see is testing your forage. And we're going to actually, if we have some time at the end, I'm going to show you an example. And then inventory. And the reason is we don't always, typically get 2 or 3 cuttings and they're never going to be the same, but that allows us to inventory the nutrients we have so that we know exactly what nutrients we have, what we may need to add with them for certain stages of growth. But again, work with county agents, get this forage tested. It's going to be a very simple return on investment. And I just threw this up here. This is a report, let's say if you went to the University of Georgia, the numbers I look at. So if we look at this, I realize there's a lot of boxes. Don't worry about the things at the top. But I first look here, relative forage quality. That's just an index that tells us how good this is compared to other forages. And just give you a point of reference is a 100 RFQ refers to full bloom alfalfa. So as we get above 100, we're doing better. As we get below 100, we're losing quality. As you can see here, 65, this is some really bad stuff. And RFQ essentially takes in digestibility plus the ability of that animal to consume it, dry matter intake. And so then I look at this dry matter intake number and 1.75. That means an animal can consume 1.75% of their body weight in this forage. Essentially, we're getting into gut fill. So the more fibrous, the more mature a forage is, the slower it moves through that digestive system. So we're impacting that animal's ability. I want this number to be no lower than 2.25. So that means that we are not limiting the intake ability of that animal. So in this example, I already see we're not getting into good, we're getting into some bad water here because we've got really low RFQ. Dry matter is going to be limiting. And then I tell people to take your Sharpie and this as sampled, just mark it out. We're not looking at as sampled, except for the moisture. We will check the moisture down here. And that's the next thing I look at. We can see the dry matter on this hay is 75%. If you're not familiar with hay production, our goal is 85% dry matter. We can get a little lower. We can get down closer to 80, but anything below 80 is first what I call barn burner hay, because it is starting to get moist enough that we can have microbial fermentation going on, and not a good thing. And it gets hot, and we've seen people lose or hay barns burn down because it combusts because it gets so hot. But we can also get into issues with mold if we have wet hay. So again, there's something really going on here with this sample. And then I come up here and I don't worry about a lot of this, just the top line on each of these boxes, total digestible nutrients. That is our energy value. And I apologize, the box, there we go. And we see this is 45.8. If anybody's really been paying attention, they remember back to that figure I showed you, even for our brood cows, this isn't even enough energy for a dry cow, which is that lowest stage of production. But we do see, if we look over here at protein's at 10.3. So it's not terrible. That's decent. And this was from a year when we had a really wet summer. It was really tough getting forage up. So we had stuff, people were putting fertilizer out, but it was really wet. They couldn't put 3 days together in order to get the forage out of the field. So we had a lot of stuff that was decent protein, but low in energy because it was very mature. And then finally, look down here at nitrates. Again, we look at this on a dry matter basis. You can see this is a little over 3,300 parts per million. The cutoff for the nitrate test that they use at the University of Georgia, if it's under 4,000 parts per million, I'm not worried. If it gets above that, then we have some concern. And we can talk about that later if y'all want to have any questions. And then we can get into the minerals. That helps us look at that and look at our mineral tag to make sure we're meeting the requirements from a mineral standpoint. So that was just a quick, crude interpretation of the hay results. And if you got any more questions, please, as we move along, don't hesitate to stop me. Okay, so then I wanted to, this is a pretty neat case study they did. Can't remember the state, and you can see it's back from 1982, but still the same situation we're facing these days. So I think it's good data. We can make it applicable. But they had 3 different groups of heifers, and they used low-quality fescue hay. So it was better than what we saw in the last slide, but it was not very good. Essentially, it was just good enough to keep a cow or heifers from losing weight. And remember, they're growing, so we want them to gain weight. So they split them into 3 groups, and they either fed them nothing, 3 pounds of supplementation, or 6 pounds of supplementation. So this is a group of heifers. You can see we got about 112, 113 in each of these groups. And at weaning, here's what these heifers weigh. So they're pretty small, but this is back in the early 80s when body sizes were small. Overall, we had smaller cattle. But if we look at it, at the breeding weight, so we supplemented them, and this is over about, I believe, 150-day period. Supplementation, or maybe not long, excuse me, I think it's 50 days. But still, the daily gain, so again, these just maintained. These gained about a half a pound. And this isn't great. I mean, this is 0.8 pounds. It's still, we got to move in the right direction. We typically want to see them gain more. But look at the pregnancy rates. It's kind of similar to what we saw with the other, when we're talking about body condition. 84% is not terrible for a group of heifers, but then you see we get all the way down here to the 69%. So we're setting things up to not look very well. And then we look at subsequent performance. So those that calved, you can see what they weaned as far as a calf. So we went from 400 pounds up to 443. So it's a double whammy here. Not only did they have fewer that bred, we had lighter calves. And then a triple whammy, we look at them as first calf heifers that were getting them breed for the second time. Remember what I said earlier, that a lot of times tends to be the biggest challenge is getting them to breed the second time. And you can see here that we had even lower conception rates on the second go round. So you can see how we create this divergent groups just by not focusing on nutrition. And so what I did is I took this and said, okay, let's say we have 3 different groups, and we're looking at 3 different groups. We have 100 cows or heifers. We can do 1 heifer, we can do 10 heifers. We can use some multiplication or division. But I went and said, all right, the cost of supplementation, which is really high right now, I said $275. Technology's getting me. I just lost my screen. Let me see if I can get back. There we go. Sorry about that. $275 a ton. So that supplementation, you can see, so essentially what we're saying is at 3 pounds a head over that period of time for the total group, it's going to cost us a little under $6,200 for feeding them just 3 pounds. It's going to cost us $12,000 to feed those heifers 6 pounds per head per day. You're probably saying that is not what we want to do. But if we look at the numbers, if we assume a 90% calf crop, right, because there's inevitably, especially with heifers, there's going to be something along the way. But across the board, let's say 90%. Based on their weaning weights, we can look at these groups. So essentially what I did is I took 100 heifers times 69% conception rate. So that's 69 calves times 90%, which gets us to 62 calves. And at 405 pounds apiece, that means for this group, we had a little over 25,000 pounds to sell at the end of that calving season. But through supplementation, we got all the way up to 33,000, almost 34,000 pounds. Then we take the the value of that calf crop, and you can see here, I believe it's probably the things, I think it's $1.80 is what I use. But you can see then what that calf crop's going to be, and then return on feed compared to that 0. You can see even though we invested $12,000 at 6 pounds, it returned us $84.60 per heifer. So that shows you that focusing on nutrition, even if it's going to cost us an investment on the front end, it may end up in the long end, and impact positively our bottom dollar and our ability to make money just off our heifers. There we go. So then this is another way to look at it. So what I want to do is look at 4 different cuttings of hay. And these are kind of represent some of 3 different cuttings of hay, and then winter annuals. So this would be, 3 different, let's say we had 3 cuttings and we had a good, a bad, and a not so good. But then maybe we also look at something, we didn't talk about this earlier, but winter grazing, winter annuals. Tremendous resource of nutrients. So first, if we look at what would be the projected average daily gain if we fed this to our heifers, and you can see this essentially is kind of like what we saw earlier with that low quality fescue. They're pretty much going to maintain their projected conception rate is going to be about 50%. And you see as we improve, we get a little bit better gains, a little bit better conception rates. Even on this stuff, we call it good Bermuda grass hay, but it's still not going to be good enough, does not have the energy there to get our heifers where we need to be. But then we put them on something like winter grazing, very high energy, great protein, and you can see that essentially at that point we're meeting all those requirements to keep them growing. So then I want to look at it a little bit different. So let's look at each of these. And remember, I talked about those 3 different phases. And through this, I'm looking at something. A lot of times I just use a 50-50 mix of corn gluten and soy whole pellets, because it's very versatile feed and usually is one of our more economical feeds. There's always opportunities to look at different things, but that's at least a good place to start a conversation and think about what we can do. But you can see, if we look at the first one, this poor Bermuda grass hay. So for those developing those growing heifers, we're going to need about 9.5 pounds. Then as we get in that first calf heifer, if she's a body condition score 5, so she's where we need her to be, so we're doing well, we got to feed her 11 pounds. But if she's a body condition score 4, which you talked about earlier, we're going to have to up it. So we're feeding her 2.5 pounds, which doesn't seem like that much, but it can add up pretty quickly. And notice I put this little superscript up here. Hopefully we're looking at these females early on, but if we look at them at calving and say, we don't have them at the body condition we need, you remember we only got 80 days to get them where we need them to. So that's a pretty short amount of time to turn a big ship around. So we almost have to double this. And obviously if we double this, we're getting into some pretty high supplementation rates. Really probably not what we need to be doing with this specific, but I put that there just to emphasize if we wait to the last minute, it's going to cost us a lot. But then as you see, as we improve our forage quality, we reduce our need for any supplementation to the point that if we lose something like winter annuals, we can actually use some of this other hay to stretch out our winter grazing because we actually have nutrients available that are above the requirements we need. But again, that's a plug for another talk. We talk about winter grazing and how to utilize that in our production system. And this is just how I visualize it. So if we're tracking these heifers over a period of time, so like the first 5 years, and we're looking at energy status. So when I say critical energy status, more or less I'm saying that's kind of that break between a 4 and a 5. And then we look at their productivity and we look at their body condition, and you can see under proper nutrition, we inevitably are going to have some ebbs and flows with body condition. But if we're doing a good job with keeping her in this proper plan of nutrition, so she stays in that critical energy zone, and she always breeds when we want her to. But what then happens is we kind of slip a little bit. We get her bred the first year, and then as a 2-year-old, she calves, and then she slips a little bit. We finally get her rebred, and then she comes back a little bit. But over time, she slowly slips to the point where she just doesn't breed. And it's one of the biggest things we tell people is you cannot keep an open cow in your herd because she costs you too much money. And this is what happens then. And I typically say my goal as a nutritionist is to cover everything. So if this cow doesn't rebreed, it's her fault, not our fault. We want everything to be their fault. So we know we've done everything we've done from a management standpoint. So when we do make that culling decision, it is based on her inability to perform the way we want her to. So this is what I talked about earlier about a hay sample, and this is kind of my passion. So I always try to bring it back. And this is just some real world. And the reason I want to do this is if we talk about our hay, we're right in the middle of hay season. I know we had some dry spells early on, but some people are getting to put up some hay now. And when I'm out visiting with county agents and we do farm talks, or maybe I'm doing one of these and talking with producers and saying, well, how good is your hay? It's not every time, but they're typically I get one number and it's protein. I'll say, oh, it's 10% hay. Oh, it's really good. It's 12% hay. And what my observation is more often than not, I feel like we focus on protein, but energy is limited. And so that goes back to that need to test forage just so we know what we have. And so what we did for our Master Cattlemen's program, when we did in one of the counties, I worked with a county agent and we set up a little survey. And what we offered was people to come in if they brought a hay sample in, and we were geared towards people that hadn't tested before. But if they would bring in a sample to get it tested and take a quick survey, and essentially through that survey, we wanted to know what they thought they had. So the idea is then through the survey, we get what they think they have, and then we're going to test all these samples and know what they actually have so we can make the comparison. So if we look at this here, this figure, we're looking at crude protein. So each one of these dots represents a sample. Okay, for just simplicity, we won't worry about the boxes. But if we look at it from a energy requirements, I'm gonna bring back up those lines I showed you earlier when we had our figure of cows, and you can see that about a third of them or better have the energy, the protein requirements for a peak lactation cow. So we're doing okay. All of them pretty much meet the requirements of late lactation, and everything by far exceeds that for a dry cow. Now, if we wanted to draw the line, see our heifers are very similar to peak lactation. So they're about here. So we need maybe some of these samples, we're going to need a little bit of supplementation, but we're doing decently. We got several samples up here that meet the requirements. But now if we look at it from an energy standpoint, again, this is TDN, total digestible nutrients. Each dot represents a sample. Now, if we bring back up these lines, essentially none of them met the requirements for a peak lactation cow. Maybe 25% met them for late lactation. And as I said earlier, it's easy to get dry cow by, but most of them wouldn't meet the requirements. Now, if we do our line for our heifers, it's going to be somewhere between 62 and 65%, depending on that stage of production. So you can see that no matter we're talking about brood cows or heifers, we're in an energy deficient situation across the board for the most part. So what I did then, if we looked at them across the board, we about 83% underestimated protein. And what I mean by that is they actually had more than what they thought they had. So if they said 10%, it was actually 12%. So 83% of these people actually had better protein than what they thought. But half of them overestimated energy. So they actually thought they had more energy than what they actually had. So an example, I took one of our producers, one of the samples, and they estimated that they had 60% energy, but it's actually only 55.5. And so this is for a brood cow, this example we used for this program. And this is the difference of 4.5% total digestible nutrients. So at first glance, say, well, that's not that much difference. But actually, if we went and looked at that curve and the point at which this amount of energy would meet the requirements is going to cause them to slip 2 cycles. It's going to be about 40 days post ideal breeding time to when they'll finally have those requirements met and they start to cycle. So what does that mean? Remember we said that every day represents about 2 pounds. So we're saying that calf's going to be 40 days younger. So that means it's going to be about 8 pounds lighter. And at $1.50, I changed, this is an older number, but at $1.50, that means we just lost $120. Just not having that cow, or we could say heifer, on the right plane of nutrition. So then what we say, that if we'd only known kind of deal, 4 pounds of corn gluten is all they needed to get them by that 40 days to maintain that body condition. So on a per cow basis, if we're paying $320 a ton, which is a lot, that's $38.40 per head that we have to invest in that female to get her to rebreed. But what we're saying is that $38.40 return us $120. There's not a lot of return on investment in that short amount of time that's out there for us to go get. So that's at the end of the day, that's why testing our forages allows us to be so much more efficient with what we have. And with that, I realize I've been talking for a long time. I didn't think I was going to talk this long. I apologize. I hope some people are still awake. But I always put this up here, the Georgia Commodity Commission for beef. Every animal that's sold in the state, there's $1 that stays inside Georgia. And part of it goes to help educational opportunities. So any of our people involved with the beef cattle, if they're doing presentations or doing educational programs, we try to make sure that this helps them get to where they need to be. And with that, I'm going to hush, and hopefully there's some questions, some discussion. I'll stick around as long as y'all want to and talk about any of this.
How you doing, Lawton? I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Terrell Johnson. I'm going back through the PowerPoint. You had the body condition score and the reproductive efficiency. And it looked like the reproductive efficiency was higher for a cow with a body score of 5, more so than the cow that was higher than a 6. Why is that? Why would a 6 yield less than a 5 as far as a reproductive efficiency?
That is a great question. So right here, you said this 6 and above. 6s are okay. If I had 6s by themselves, they would have been right there with the 5s. The trick is there we have our 8s and 9s, 7, 8s and 9s in there too. So when I say 6 and above, so we can actually get cows too fat to where that fat around the reproductive tract squeezes it down, so it affects reproduction. But also there's some hormone issues, fat soluble hormones that their hormone balance is off. So that's a great question, but that's why I want to kind of focus on that split between the 4s and the 5s.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
This is Paul Copeland. I noticed on the testing of hay, how often would you recommend testing of hay? I try to cut at least 3 times a year. I've only tested 1 out of the 3. Would you recommend testing all of those 3 because it could vary from cutting to cutting?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Yeah, that's definitely test it by cutting, because it doesn't matter how good we are. There's inevitably something between weather or kids' activities or something that's going to impact our ability. So yes, we can see variations between cuttings. Same field, different cutting, there can be variations. So yeah, my advice is to spend I believe at least the university, it's about $25 to $30 per sample. But definitely I think it's worth that investment to test each cutting that you have.
Mr. Stewart, this is Carolyn. We have a small operation in Southwest Georgia, so we're not at the point where we can cut our own hay.
Mm-hmm.
But I noted that not many producers are testing their hay. So if I ask for the feed and forage analysis report and it's not available, how long is the turnaround to get the test results?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because we do have a lot of the small producers throughout the state, and they just don't have the space or really the capability to cut their own hay. Absolutely. If they say I don't have a test on it, say, well, do you mind if I go out and grab one, please? And that's where county agent, somebody can help you that maybe have a probe to help you go grab a quick sample, a few of the bales, take a core sample, send it off. It's typically, if you can get it in the hands of the county agent, I say there's 2 routes. If you need a rapid one, there's the Waters Lab that may be easier to get to and get a quicker response. Whereas you can send it to the county agent, they send it off. And it's usually about, by the time it gets to the lab, because they can run a sample, it takes about 3 days to get it back once they get it in their hands. But definitely, even if it's, and then the question I get a lot of times when I've done even like some drought talks, they say, well, if I ask them for a hay sample or a forage analysis, they say, I don't have one. And I say, well, you better give me one. They say, well, I got 10 people lined up behind you to buy the hay. So you take it or you leave it. And that's a real world situation. So I say, even then, if we still purchase it, we still need to get that hay sample and send it in. So then we know we've already purchased it, but we still got to know what we're working with so that we know if and how much supplementation may be needed.
Lawton, this is Omer McCants. You gave us a sample. You showed us a sample report.
Uh-huh.
The forage report. Could you? I think we'll have access to that. But could you prepare one that would show, for instance, that 1.75 dry matter intake thing, 1.75? You said it should be no lower than 2.2. Do you have something that would show, can you prepare something that would show what we should be looking at? As I look at a sample, if I look at a real live report from a hay producer, that I would look and say, oh yeah, that's good, because I see the 2.2 there minimal. I see the, whatever the numbers are, whatever the desired RFQ is. As you said, 65.4 was probably not good. 100 is best. So do you have something prepared, or can you prepare something that would show what the minimal numbers we ought to be looking for as we analyze those reports? Sure.
So there's 2 ways. One, we could put something together. Absolutely. RFQ, there's no unit that goes wrong with it. So it's just an index. And there's 2 things. There's a larger document. It's called Understanding Forage Quality. And here in a second, I'll pull up our webpage, just kind of show you where to get some of that. And then also there is a place there that shows nutrient requirements of different stages. And so that would be, I guess, the quickest way. There's some other things out there. I'd be happy to even put together maybe a 1-pager. I'm trying to think if I may have somewhere else. But essentially what we want to do is look at our females, our cows, our heifers, and know where their requirements are, so then we can look at this. Because at the end of the day, I look at this dry matter intake. If we look at the RFQ, it's pretty much going to tell us what that dry matter, because they use that number to produce the RFQ number. I really get focused on energy and the protein values, because that's how we balance the ration. That's how we actually meet the requirements of that female.
We did have a question about when they test the hay. So if you cut your own at cutting, but then when you go to feed it, and so is both times, one time?
So, well, let me say, typically no. I typically say, as soon as we put it in the bale and we're moving it to where we're going to store it. And I realize there's a lot of hay that's stored outside, but that's usually the ideal time because it gives us time to work with before we're feeding it. So ideally, whether we're buying it, as soon as we're buying it, we're trying to get that test so we know as soon as we're putting it in storage, whether it's in the barn or outside, we know where it is. Or if we're cutting our own hay, as soon as we cut it, once we have it in a round bale, unless we have significant weather impact or it's wet and it's going to ferment a little bit, those nutrients should be close enough at that point to when we actually feed it later on. So that would be the simplest way to do it is just once it's in a round bale, sample it once. But good question.
This is James Ford. You talked earlier about not growing cows, but growing grass. And those people who are selling hay seem like it'd be incumbent upon them to test the hay and use that as a marketing tool. So do you promote that for people who just growing hay for sale?
Absolutely, Mr. Ford. You nailed that one right on the head. I've tried to talk to some hay producers that sell it and tell them, if anything else, like you said, that is a marketing tool for them. If they're doing a good job and they can have that hay report, and you can say, look at this stuff. It's 120 RFQ, 60% energy, 12% protein. It meets the requirements or exceeds for any stage of cattle production you may have. Man, who wouldn't want to buy that? That's you're absolutely right on that. And sometimes I'm a little reluctant. I had a question earlier about they don't provide one. Sometimes we got to get hay wherever we can, but sometimes I'm a little reluctant if a hay producer will not provide one of those. You may worry about what the quality may be. But Mr. Ford, you're exactly right on that one.
Hey, Lawton, this is Rodney West. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. Say you are in your cycle where you got maggots and worms, got them sprayed, got them under control. When would you recommend pulling your hay sample? That particular cycle or the cycle beyond that?
I would do it whenever you cut the hay. And you broke up a little bit. I think you said you had some army worms, maybe some stem grass, stem maggots issues. So you have some pest issues. So a lot of times we say, just go ahead. As soon as you see them, you cut that hay as fast as you can and dry it down. So that would be definitely test that hay. So as soon as you get it dried, test, rolled, sample it. But essentially kind of like the situation we talked about earlier, we want to test it per cutting. So if we have an extra cutting because of our pest or army worms, we want to test that just like we would the next cutting, hopefully after we got them under control and got up our next cutting. And let me know if I misunderstood the question there.
You spot on.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the area, man, but yeah, you answered it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We had another question in the chat box.
And this next one, if the hay does not meet the qualities to support the herd, where can we find support to determine the amount of supplemental intake? Yeah, that's a great question. And essentially that's, I don't know where you're located, Ms. Ford, but that's what hopefully our extension programs, extension county agents can help you. You can sit down with them because then if some of them, they can do it themselves. If not, they're going to get a hold of one of us so that we can help put something together. We do have we have a spreadsheet program if you're comfortable with that. Most of our resources are at ugabeef.com. But it can help you if you want to try to do some things on your own, try to see what's going on, what you can find. But essentially, those county agents are source of information such as this and can help put the pieces together. Typically we're saying, let's try to find what are our feed resources. Tractor supply is not always the best place to go buy supplementation. It tends to be a little more expensive. And again, that can be another talk we can have hopefully in the near future is actually how do we really start looking at these supplements and what's the difference in corn gluten versus soybean hulls versus corn versus soybean meal, and how do we evaluate those from an economical standpoint? But I say that to say, hopefully you're in an area where some of your extension personnel, maybe even have a young farmer advisor, some of those people that can help you put some of these pieces together.
I have a question that's not related, but years ago, we used to use these grazing sticks. Are they still appropriate to use? And if so, where can you find some?
They are, in fact, here's one sitting right here. This is what you're talking. I don't know if you got your camera
Right,
on. I don't know if you can see that. Yep.
Yes.
NRC was the ones that put them out for a while. Sometimes you can find them online at places like NASCO, but I believe NRCS, was the ones that did some of these, and they should probably still have some. Or I probably need to check with Dr. Baxter, Lisa Baxter. Every once in a while, I think they have some made. But yeah, anything like this is, it's not the perfect science, but I mean, it's something to estimate it, and it gives us a place to start measuring. Because it was the saying, if you can't measure it, you can't change it or manage it, I believe. Start with an RCS, but I'll also try to do some digging as well, and get back with Niki and some of the other people that are helping with the program, so maybe we can get some of these resources out to everyone. And what he was talking about, I was holding up for everybody else. It's about it's a yardstick, but it's a cube, and on each side, it's got some information that helps you. So if you're going out walking in a pasture, it's got some lines on one end. So basically, you just walk through and put it into place. Depending on where the forage height is, it gives you an estimation of what the forage mass is in that area. So the idea would be then if we walk out in a pasture and we stop every 10 steps, we're kind of getting about what an average is. So it gives us an idea of where we are from a forage standpoint. And then also, maybe to answer somebody else's question too, it has some information on here about different stages of production and what requirements are.
Hey, Dr. Stewart, this is Handy.
Yes,
I guess one of the themes for these series of classes that we're putting on will basically answer the question, is it profitable for all farmers to raise their replacement heifers? And so with you being able to go through these numbers, it may just be for some farms just to basically buy replacement heifers. And so this is why we wanted this course, for people to kind of know what's all entailed in developing heifers. And they farm may not be suited to do that, and it may be in their best interest just to go ahead and buy heifers that's already bred. So I appreciate you kind of going through this, and kind of, if you could kind of speak on that, was it economical for a farm to develop their own heifers or just to purchase their own heifers?
Right, exactly. So that's typically when we talk about developing heifers, it's kind of like everything. We need a group. The bigger the group, the easier it is, because there's certain costs that are. It doesn't matter if we have one heifer, if we have 100 heifers, we're going to have a certain amount of cost. And even things like vaccines. Vaccines are in a bottle of 10. So whether we need to vaccinate 4 heifers or 10 heifers, we're going to have to open that bottle. And I don't know if there's a magic number of how many it takes. But if we are a smaller producer, and when I say, the average herd size in Georgia is maybe 30 at most. So we're talking about a lot of smaller herds. And then we also think about, okay, a general number is we're replacing 10% of our females each year. So if I got 30 cows, I'm replacing 3 a year. That means there's 3 heifers. So from that standpoint, it's more than likely going to be more economical to buy those heifers. But then it's also a good exercise to maybe sit down and pencil out, because you're either going to have to go buy a new bull. And a lot of times we talk about bulls, and I'll talk about this later, a Cavanese bull, one that's specific for heifers, or if we're using some technology like artificial insemination, we either got to pay somebody to come do it, or we have to learn to do it ourselves. So, a lot of times, more often than not, it's going to be better or easier, I should say, simpler, to either to buy those heifers, or if we have some heifers that we just know are the best ones, we want to maintain those genetics, to do something to where we have somebody custom develop them for us. Something like the UGA herd program. There's some others around, I believe, some private people that'll do that. So then, because if anything else, we had one producer up here, he'd haul them all the way to Tipton. He says, I can't do it. I don't have the time to do it, and I can't do it as cheap as y'all do it. And it's not necessarily cheap, but he's just putting a price tag on his time and his resources, and he realizes it's worth his time to haul those 5 heifers to South Georgia and let them develop them, as opposed to him trying to dedicate the space and time and effort to do it correctly at his own place.
Some of the farms we visited, they probably can do not to keep their own heifers. I mean, sometimes they just keep them because they bred it, but it doesn't mean it's the right quality. So he and Dr. Stewart's talked today, help open some eyes about should you be really doing that or not.
Yeah, and that brings out the point that sometimes you can make faster genetic change just buying heifers that meet your genetic goals versus trying to breed them up.
Well, Lawton, can you give me a sense when you travel around the state, what are some of your top 3 problems that producers are having raising their heifers?
Well, so I would say it starts with nutrition, not getting them to grow properly, so that they start puberty. They go through puberty at the point to get us to cycle when we want them to. So I'd say a lot of it revolves around that nutritional aspect of it. The second thing I guess I would say is making excuses, maybe. I guess would that be the right thing? Like we have this, so apparently it's out of a cow that's 05X7342, it's supposed to be the best genetics there ever was, but I can't get her bred, so I'm gonna keep her around. So making excuses for them, and some of the best. I kind of made the joke that actually I grew up with sheep, and I kind of make the joke that when I finally left the house, my dad started making all the right decisions because he didn't have me there to be his labor, basically. So he realized that there's all these things that need to be done. So he started to culling heavier, and he ended up with a really good flock of ewes that were really easy keeping. So I'd say that those are probably the 2 biggest things: is nutrition and then making excuses. And then the other thing would possibly be just not focusing on it, just essentially just running heifers in with the cows, and just if they breed with the bull, they breed with the bull, and those are replacements. Because then we can run into one, trying to make genetic selection, but also genetic progress, but also more than likely that bull, either one, is going to be related to that heifer, or 2, it could be one that the birth weight, the calving ease is going to be so high that we're going to cause issues with that heifer.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Paul, you want to inform the group what you have coming available?
We are trying to plan a family and friends day at our ranch around the 15th of October. We're looking to sell maybe 15 to 17 heifer calves for replacement. We have a couple of bulls still on the pasture. We're going to take them to get them scrotum tested, semen tested, all that stuff prior to. We have hay there as well, and as you said just a few minutes ago, I'll get all 3 of my cuttings tested, have those sheets for people that want to purchase the hay and stuff as that around October timeframe, if the hay has not already moved during that time.
And with that, Mr. Ford, you want to give us an update, any information you have?
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. We've been talking about forage. There's an opportunity for a sign up for Natural Resources Conservation Service EQIP program. And if you start thinking about improving your forage or maybe planting some different grasses, that will be an opportunity for you to maybe qualify for that. Also in the program, there are some things that deal with soil quality. So the sign up is open sign up anytime, but they make the determination sometime in October. So if you have not signed up and need some help through EQIP, I would advise you to sign up for that. The other thing is August 1st is the deadline for qualifying for the Farm Service Agency County Committee. And this is very important because, of course, the county committee determines some activities that's going on in each county, and you can qualify for the county committee. But if you don't qualify, find out who's on the county committee, where you can have some influence with them, and some of the things that you require, some of the things you want, you have some influence on that. But that deadline is August the 1st to qualify. And the other thing is to keep in mind, if you don't have a farm and tract number, and if you have one, just kind of check in every year to make sure it's up to date.
Some of the farms we visited, they probably can do not to keep their own heifers. I mean, sometimes they just keep them because they bred it, but those means it's the right quality. So he and Dr. Stewart's talk today help open some eyes about should you be really doing that or not.
Yeah, and that brings out the point that sometimes you can make faster genetic change just buying heifers that meet your genetic goals versus trying to breed them up. I'd like to thank Lawton for coming and speaking, and we have had Lisa and Jennifer on. They are actually on my YouTube channel recorded. So if anybody wants to go back and review those, you're welcome to. So again, thanks, Lawton. Do you have anything else? Any last words of wisdom?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. You know, sometimes you do Zoom meetings and it's, I've come up with the term zombies. Like you get on these meetings and don't know if anybody's alive, but I tell you what, I really enjoyed this evening, all the questions and discussion. You know, that's the fun part of my job is getting in and getting with the group that's engaged and asking questions. So if I can ever do anything else to help out, please let me know.
All right. Thanks again for coming, everybody. So we look forward to seeing you again. And have a good evening, everybody.